Well, I'm sad to say that really the big thing I'm taking away from this one is I'm a bit disappointed. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Sailing to Sarantium by Gavriel, which is the first book in the Sarantium Mosaic duology, this is the third Gavriel book that I've read, and the first one that's not a standalone. And I feel like I will preface this with my expectations were probably a bit too high, considering the first two that I read were Lions of Albersan, which is one of my favorite novels of all time now, and A Song for Our Bone, which I feel like is on a similar level, although I prefer Lions of Albersan. And so really could not be setting the bar a whole lot higher. And that said, I wasn't expecting to really have any Gavriel books be more of a miss, and this one kind of was for me. And there were definitely some positives here, but I just overall had a lot more complaints than things that I liked. So let's talk about it though. So this is taking place in the same world actually as Lions of Albersan, just well before. And our main character we're following is Crispin, or Caius Crispus, who is a mosaicist, and he ends up, through the course of events, traveling to the city of Sarantium in order to create a grand mosaic there, and that's kind of the impetus for what we have here. This is inspired by the poem, which I ended up reading afterwards. I'll talk about it a little bit, but by John Yates, called Sailing to Byzantium, and is really taking place in that kind of period, which this one felt a lot closer to that, late Roman period than some of the other ones did. Maybe it's because I'm more familiar with it, but just a lot of the things we had happening, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've seen this before. And so that, I think, contributed a little bit as well. So the big thing here is this is still Gavriel. So take this a little bit with a grain of salt, because I have a lot of complaints, but also it's because I hold Gavriel to a high standard based on what I've read from him. So this is not a bad book, and no matter how much I'm going to complain about it, remember that I'm saying this is not a bad book. I just know for a fact that Kay can do better, and he did some things here that I would have liked to see done better. So talking a little bit about the positives first, because there are still some just beautiful passages here. The discussion on art, Kay does like to have art involved with his characters a lot. You have a poet in Lions of Albersan. You have A Song for Our Bone, which is, of course, following the troubadours and bards and music being very important. And here it's the act of mosaics, and mosaicist is our main character. And so the discussions there, the way that that's looked at, the way he views life through kind of this view, the attention to details and light and movement, and how the sun and the moon and everything plays upon the mosaic, the way he talks about it, the passion with which the character talks about it, those are some really positive things that I enjoyed. There's also some really interesting conversation around religion here, which is something I do very much tend to enjoy in my fantasy books. Looking at the religious differences of some characters and regions here, as well as mixing in a bit of mysticism and different things, as well as the more traditional religions that we're used to seeing in some of the other Gavriel books so far. And so those parts I found to be quite interesting. This is also in comparison, the K book with the most sort of like magic or that kind of thing pulled in, so the more fantastical elements, I'll say, more so than like magic. So I thought that was interesting, and I think for the most part it was pretty well done and was interesting. But that also plays a little bit into my first big complaint here, which is characters. I did not really connect with the characters here nearly as much as I normally do. Even with Lions of Albersan, I connected with the main characters almost immediately. I loved them all. They were great. In Song for Our Bone, it took a little bit because the main character there is problematic at first, and part of the journey is changing. Here, though, we have Crispin, who is a little bit hot-headed, likes to use creative curses and insults at people, and we're told that he's angry at the world and everything because of a tragedy that's happened, and non-spoiler, it's revealed pretty much right away. His family was lost during the plague, and so he's really angry at the world through that. But even then, we're mostly told these things about him, and yeah, we see him being sort of angry and, yelling at people and constantly getting into trouble as we go along. But it didn't feel like we ever got particularly deep into his character. Him being the main character, I think that is a little bit troublesome as well. Also, just the character felt kind of over the top at some points to me. And we do see, which I've heard that you sometimes get this in Guy Gavriel novels, but the character just being irresistible to basically every woman he meets too just screams wish fulfillment to me, and also just irritated me. So there's a lot of really great scenes, and there's even one scene that still falls under that, but was really good. But so I struggled to connect to the character as much, and that's who we're spending most of our time with. Because the other thing is there are plenty of side characters, and they do have some really good moments, but the focus just seemed to be so little on a lot of these side characters. It seemed like we just kind of, in the story, we acquire them and discard them as needed until, the author feels like kind of picking them back up, like, oh, maybe I'll have you do something again. You haven't been relevant in a while. And it just felt kind of odd, and I was really missing the depth of the other characters, especially because I had some issues with the main character. And that's really, I feel like, what ultimately kept me from connecting, because there were some strong characters. We have Cassia and Vargas are the other two kind of main side characters, and then there's a character at the beginning, I won't specify, that ends up coming back at the end and being relevant. But again, we spent so little time with them and really delving into them. I feel like we're robbed of what could have been a much more emotional scene, even though the particular scene I'm talking about, which if you know, is still very good. And that's the thing. This just is everywhere. It stopped from being great. There are parts that are very good, and there are parts that are not the best. But it's still a solid book. I was so torn on if this was going to be like, I landed sort of 3.5, and I was torn between if it was rounding down to 3 or rounding up to 4, and it could go either way. It's probably a little bit more of rounding up to 4, but at the same time, there were a lot of things that weren't the best with the characters. Now, the world to talk about, like I said, I feel like for me, because I'm a little bit more familiar with and have read more stuff that's set in a similar time period with, the Roman stuff, the hippodrome and chariot races and, just the blues and the greens with the gangs and stuff, like a lot of that, even the particular emperor and empress, which are very much analog to a real emperor and empress as well, from the time period. It felt a little bit more familiar than normal. And because of the fact that it felt a bit more familiar, and because of the fact that we weren't doing a lot to really add original things to the world, that's where I feel like also I'm like, okay, I can't really latch onto the characters, I can't really latch onto the world, so what am I left with? Now, thankfully, this is Guy Gavriel K, so there are still really beautiful scenes that I enjoyed. And I mentioned earlier on the bits of mysticism, which also I think were some of my favorite passages with how that looked. It was a different sort of look into the idea of fantastical elements or magic or whatever you want to call it than we've really gotten. And the way that it was handled and the impact it had, I thought was really cool, including some things that wrap back around there with it. And so I did really enjoy some of those parts as well. I think even though this is book 1 of a duology, it does stand alone pretty well. It feels like some things are actually almost wrapped up a little bit too well, which is funny because it's the book 1. But you could honestly stop here. Despite my complaints, I'm not planning to, for the record. But you could honestly probably stop here and have a satisfying conclusion. It ends a little bit open-ended, but also with the implications letting you very much know what's going to happen. So I am still planning to read book 2, and I've heard that it's a little bit better. I honestly am going in with much, much lowered expectations, though, based on this first book, because I don't expect to love the second book either, but we're going to give it a shot and see how I end up feeling about it for sure, and go from there. But let me know, because I know that with any Guy Gavriel K novels, I know there's fans, and I know specifically some others who have read this of late, and for the most, I'm pretty sure I'm by far the most negative on this out of our whole buddy reading group too. I've been trying not to be overly negative in our chat about it because I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but let me know your thoughts on this, because I imagine this is going to be a little bit controversial for people who really, really enjoyed this one, but for me, it just was a lot more of a miss. And I'm really glad that I didn't start with this, because if I would have started with this, I would have put off reading more K for sure. So although maybe starting at the top was not the best either, because it's only the way down from here. I still, like I said, there was enough good here that like I still had a good time overall with it. And so it's not a bad book, like I said at the beginning, but just left me wanting more for sure. But really, those are my thoughts on Sailing to Sarantium by Gavriel K. I did mention as well that I was inspired by the poem. I will link to the poem, because I'm not much of a poetry person, but I had talked to Joanna about the poem and the kind of the connections, and she definitely was able to analyze and look at way more. So if you haven't, it was really interesting to read that and look and be like, oh, okay, I see kind of where that parallels here. So I found that really interesting to talk about too. So I don't have a lot to add, because it would be spoilery, and B, like I said, I don't want to give away somebody else's thoughts as if they're my own. So definitely you can check out the poem if you want to take a look there, and then I'll link Joanna's video where she talks about it as well, just so you have that there also. But that's it for this one. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments. Like I said, agree or disagree, totally fine. I always love to hear from you. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.